Dozens of Palestinians have been released in the West Bank. It is the fourth swap of the Gaza ceasefire deal, with more than 180 Palestinians expected to be freed in total today. Earlier on this morning, 3 Israelis were released by Hamas. 54-year-old Ofer Kalderon was the first to be released and handed to the Red Cross. The Israel Defense Forces say he's since been taken to hospital for medical treatment and to reunite with his family. His 2 children, Erez and Sahar, who were 12 and 16 at the time of their capture, were freed during the week-long ceasefire back in November 2023. We then saw the release of 35-year-old Yarden Bibas, who was taken hostage alongside his wife Shiri and their 2 sons, 4-year-old Ariel and 10-month-old Kfir, the youngest of the hostages taken by Hamas. It is believed that Yarden Bibas could be the only family member still alive, with Hamas claiming the others were killed by an Israeli airstrike. And Keith Siegel, a 65-year-old dual US-Israeli citizen, was the last to be handed over this morning. He was abducted with his wife, Aviva Siegel, who was freed in the first hostage prisoner exchange in November 2023. Last year, a video released by Hamas during the Passover holiday showed him breaking down in tears, saying he hoped he would be reunited with his family. The first of the Palestinian prisoners and detainees due to be released today as part of the exchange got off a bus in Betunia in the West Bank, where they were greeted by large crowds waiting to receive them. Adam Parsons joins me live now from Tel Aviv. Adam, it seems to be that things are moving relatively smoothly because recent releases have been held up, certainly by Israel's reaction to Hamas's handling of it.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Today's releases in Gaza are a stark contrast to the frankly chaotic scenes that we saw a couple of days ago when the 3 hostages were released in 2 different locations. Actually, the first one, Agamberger, was released in Jabalia, and that was certainly considered by Hamas to be an element of theatre about that, about showing that they were still in control of Jabalia in the north. But then later on in Khan Yunis, when Gary Moses and Abel Yehud were released at a stage in front of the house of Yahya Sinwar, the former Hamas leader, it was absolutely chaotic scenes, and it was terrifying for the 2 hostages as they were led through baying crowd, as weapons were raised. People were leaning in front of them, taking photos. There was absolutely nothing about that could have been considered orderly. But the Israeli government were furious about that. They said it was horrific scenes, complained to the mediators who had arranged this ceasefire. And I think Hamas actually accepted that criticism, because today we saw something very different. Still 2 releases, the first of them in Khan Yunis, but not in front of Yahya Sinwar's house. And the 2 hostages released there were not subject to those crowds that were brought up onto a stage, then put into a Red Cross vehicle, and then they had only briefly waved towards the watching crowds. Yes, there was Hamas symbolism. Yes, there were a lot of people in green bandanas. Yes, there were weapons, but there was nothing of the chaos that we had seen on Thursday. And then a little later, the second release up in Gaza City, again, much more orderly. So this is, in a sense, I suspect that this is how people would say, this is how it's supposed to work. The focus is on, in this case, the hostages that we're talking about coming out of Gaza. This is Hostages Square in Tel Aviv, where, of course, people are reflecting on these releases of Ofer Kalderon, Yarden Bibas and Keith Siegel, who are all now back in Israeli territory. And that is the scene you're seeing now as Hostages Square. I have to say, I think there is a distinct difference between the response to these 3 people. Ofer Kalderon was in prison with 2 children who have both been released, and he looked joyous when he was released, and we've seen other images of him still full of joy. Keith Siegel, an older man 65, worries about his health, and yet he's been brought onto the stage. And we know that his wife, notably, has campaigned relentlessly for his release to maintain his image, has been similarly thrilled at the news that he was coming back. The bittersweet reaction here is about Yarden Bibas, and that is because Yarden Bibas was taken prisoner along with his wife and his two children, Ariel and Ofer. Ariel's 4, Ofer was only 9 months, the youngest person to be taken hostage on October the 7th by Hamas. And not long after that, Hamas claimed that Shiri, Ariel, and Ofer had been killed in an Israeli airstrike. Israel has never confirmed that, and there are lots of people who have hoped against hope that they would see Shiri, Ariel, and Ofer brought out, that they would have survived. And the photographs of Ariel and Ofer, red-headed children, have become very familiar, see them a lot, and they've almost been used as a touchstone of hope in Israel, desperate hope that people would be brought out alive. Instead, Yarden Bibas came out, and notably he didn't smile, he didn't laugh. We haven't seen images of him delight. We've seen images of him hugging his father, looking crestfallen and despondent. And I think for a lot of people here, there is now a great fear that, while Yarden Bibas has come out, his wife and his small young children have both perished in Gaza.
And it's important, Adam, to say that at the same time as these people being released in Gaza and in the West Bank, the Rafah border crossing has reopened to allow Palestinian patients to head into Egypt. That's the first time that's happened since May.
Yeah, and that is part of this sort of stage one of the ceasefire, is to allow people to go to make that crossing to get medical aid. There are now observers there from the European Union. They have just arrived. And I think, you mentioned there the Palestinian prisoners, we should say that. Over 180 of them are being released today. The majority of them actually going into Gaza. So this is a very large, well over 100 people who were arrested after October the 7th. There are also prisoners who were serving very long, who were given the longest life sentences, who have been taken to Gaza and deported from Israel, and also some who are being brought into the West Bank. We've seen them arriving in Ramallah, in Batuin, one of the suburbs of Ramallah. So, of course, this is part of stage one of the ceasefire, where, as well as 33 hostages being released, 1,900 Palestinian prisoners are due to be released. And also aid is supposed to be brought into Gaza in vastly greater quantities. We are seeing that as well. And on Monday, negotiations are due to start for stage 2, which is supposed to lay the groundwork for a permanent ceasefire. That, I think, is going to be a very difficult, emotionally charged, politically charged, difficult negotiation. And I think both sides, here in Israel and in Gaza and in the West Bank, will be positioning themselves now about how to exert the greatest pressure on the other side about those ceasefire negotiations. But I have to say, there are those, particularly here in Hostages Square, who do attribute praise to Donald Trump for helping to drive this ceasefire through. And Keith Siegel, the Israeli-US citizen who was released today, name-checked Donald Trump as he gave his first remarks after leaving captivity. So there is a sense here of delight that these people have been released, but it is tempered by sadness over the hostages they know have died, and a growing sense that those other members of the Bibas family have also perished.